Curious minds want to know, is there a housing crash right around the corner?
Brian, I'm really excited to have this conversation today because I think a lot of people are asking the same question. I think a lot of people are in this position. They're trying to figure out, do I buy a house? If I need to buy a house, is now the right time to buy a house? Do I wait? If I wait, am I going to regret that decision? How do I know what's going on right now with the housing market?
Well, I hate how it is so easy to get both sides of discussion where people have very strong opinions that if I'm in the decision matrix, I'm trying to figure out, should I buy a house? I wouldn't know what to do. Mm-hmm. And we have some examples of showing you the two sides of the coin. We want to come back after we kind of show you these two clips and actually give you the data points, give you the things that you ought to be thinking about to make this decision.
So there are some voices out there that are saying, yes, a crash is coming, and boy, is it going to be bad. Check this out.
Everybody's now admitting we're going to have a housing correction, but they're saying it will be mild. When people, they don't say it's going to happen, then they finally admit, well, yes, but it'll be mild. Don't listen to these people because all they do is follow the trend. When it's up, they say it'll hold up. When it's down, well, it'll be down a little. This is going to be the biggest crash in housing of our lifetime, and then we'll probably never see one again for decades. Housing does not crash as often as stocks, but these were two housing bubbles, rare in history, and the last one burst, and this one will burst the same.
So Harry Dent, a New York Times bestselling author, he believes biggest housing collapse of our lifetime?
Of our lifetime. And so that means it's going to be bigger than what we saw in the Great Recession, bigger in 2008. And so that sounds pretty dire. That sounds scary. That sounds like something, if I were thinking about buying a house, I'd be very, very nervous about, right?
So, but there's another side to this argument, because that's obviously, oh my gosh, the sky is falling. Let's hear the other side.
Housing is not going down in value. Things go up or down in value based on simple supply-demand economics, and we have a shortage of housing, not an oversupply.
So Dave was pretty cut and dry. He said housing prices are not going down. It's supply and demand driven. Houses are going to continue to go up in value because that's where the market is right now.
Run DMC Dave. I mean, if you see anybody who's listening to the podcast, we love Dave, but he is wearing a full-on tracksuit in that clip. I haven't reached the stage that I can wear the Adidas tracksuit. That's actually a Pebble Beach.
That is a Pebble Beach tracksuit. It's really interesting, right? We have these loud voices on both sides. Some saying, okay, housing is absolutely going to crash. It's going to be significant. It's going to be awful. And others saying that housing is not going to go down in value. It's going to go up in value. Well, it seems like thus far, at least where we are in our present housing market, neither of those two have been absolutely right so far.
Well,
right?
It's very entertaining to have a very strong opinion on something. I think it's much easier to get on programming, news channels, to kind of trend on social media. But as we all know, the real world is actually much more complicated than taking an opinion on black versus white. It's there's a lot more nuances or facets to the discussion. We kind of want to, let's give them a state of the housing market.
Yeah,
Bo.
Let's talk a little bit about what has happened in housing over the last few years. I mean, this is not incredibly surprising to anyone, but if you look at the rise in home values from 2015 all the way through 2022, it's been pretty remarkable. Dare I say astronomical. Just in the period from 2020 through 2022, a 45% increase in U.S. home prices. That's pretty unheard of when we think about the real estate market and how it generally tends to move from a price appreciation standpoint.
Yeah, I mean, you can see this is in direct correlation to the pandemic, the money supply, where a lot of money was put into the economy. We're seeing that it created a ton of inflationary pressure. So it's 45%. That's a pretty big increase.
But that's not all that's changed. There's another thing that's happened, especially over the last 2 years. Mortgage payments for new purchases have actually doubled in the last 2 years. So what a mortgage would have been literally during the recession for that same house is now almost doubled in just 2 years' time.
It is kind of amazing looking at this chart and seeing that you could have had a payment that was $1,500 a month that now is close to $3,000, because think about interest rates and the fact that now that we're fighting inflation, the Federal Reserve has been very aggressively raising interest rates. You go from mortgage rates that are sub 3% to now we broke 7% in the last few days. It's concerning. I mean, because it feels like you have a squeeze, especially if you're a first-time new home buyer. You're feeling it from a double whammy. You're seeing the supply chain plus the extra money cause prices to spike up. Now to fight inflation, we got interest rates that are, to the moon. It's just, this is a tough situation to navigate.
And this thing that you're describing, right? This idea that housing prices have increased, but interest rates have also really gone up substantially, has caused the affordability of housing to be in a very unique spot. Brian, I think you found this. I think you showed this to us a couple of weeks ago in show prep. Like, man, that's pretty remarkable when we look at that from strictly an affordability standpoint. Right now, housing does not look quite as good as it's looked in the past.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting. I brought it up because I had already put this in the show notes, but then, and I say it funny because y'all were picking on me. Is it Chart R?
Oh, I guess it is Charter.
But they, I get a daily chart from this, and I thought it was interesting. They also pulled this. So a lot of people are paying attention to the fact that we broke through the 100, which is the indicator of where they match up the median income of the country, median home prices, and we are actually sub 100, which means the affordability, we are in territory we haven't seen in 40 plus years. That's kind of scary. I mean, to see all these things line up, we want to kind of talk you through, now that we know these are unique times, how do you make this decision? Should you buy a home or should you wait? We're going to load you up with the information and the questions you should ask.
Yeah, we've already sort of laid the foundation here, right? Prices have increased. Maybe they've come back a touch now, but they're still relatively high. Interest rates are high. And a lot of people are saying, yes, go buy a home. You need to, or else you're going to regret it. And other people are saying, no, don't go buy a home yet because the crash is coming. And so for each of us individually, we have to answer the question, should I buy a home? And if I'm going to buy a home, is 2023 the time where I ought to consider doing that?
Now, you said something, and this is kind of a throwaway comment from one of our content meetings, Bo, but I thought it was an important one. You were talking to Daniel, and you said, Daniel, every time I've bought a house, because you're on your, third house now?
Third house now, yep.
I felt like I was overpaying.
Every single time. Yep.
So that you can't use that gut feeling that you're overpaying. Because I have a fun punchline that I use around here when people talk about Nashville real estate. And I'm like, hey, I moved here, bought the house in 2015, moved the family between 2015 and 2016. And I felt like I was getting ripped off. Guess what? People are getting ripped off
way
a
more
lot more than I was. So it does. So a lot of people, if you just go by the gut, you're going to be like, man, maybe I should because I've got some life things going on. But then there's other parts of you are very analytical. You'll be like, maybe I shouldn't. Mm-hmm. So let's kind of get into some of the questions as well as the data sections that we can cover on this.
So let's talk first, Brian, about the reasons why you might consider buying. And the first one, this one seems sort of silly, but it's a little bit more nuanced than it might sound at the beginning. The biggest reason why you might consider buying a home this year is frankly just because you need a home. You need a place to live. If you're someone who you're thinking about starting a family, you're thinking about establishing roots, you're thinking about moving into the next phase of your life, then yeah, it might make sense specifically in 2023 for you to think about, I need a place where I can start the next stage of my life with my family, expand, set roots, the whole 9 yards.
Well, everybody who has kids, especially school-age kids, if you're relocating because of something going on in the economy or you take a new job, a lot of times you're trying to set roots because you don't want to move the kids around too often from different school districts. It makes it much harder. And so we kind of came up with a question is that if you bought a house, fast forward 5 years in the future, and it actually has stayed flat or maybe even lost a little bit, 5 to 10%, would it still have been a good decision for your family? And look, I have an experience share on this. I built a house in 2003 in South Atlanta. And, if I looked at it just 5 years in the future, I actually would have lost a ton of money because that was 2003. And you add 5 years, I'm looking at the 2008, 2009 real estate marketplace. it was a completely different place. I ended up selling that residence in 2019. That's right, perfect timing, right before the big run up. And I still lost about $50,000 on that house. But I got to tell you, I still don't consider it a big mistake, because I was able to kind of be okay. I prepaid all the negative equity because I was very aggressive with paying it down. My kids went to great schools. I had a community where I had neighbors and friends. So housing is not only the financial, it's also what does the family actually need.
Well, and we think when it comes to a primary residence, in our minds, we don't think of them as investment assets. We think of them as use assets. They're something we're supposed to use and get utility out of. Well, ultimately, with any use asset, you should not care about the terminal value in the short term. That's exactly what you said. So if you're thinking, okay, if I buy this house right now and 5 years from now it goes down in value and that's going to be bad for me, okay, maybe that's not a great time for you to think about being in that house, because real estate markets behave a little bit different than other investment or asset or equity type markets.
Yeah, and that's why I think this is a perfect segue to talk about what does a recovery for real estate look like. We know stock markets, you'll hear me talk about all the time, V-shaped recoveries, because what the market sentiment will kind of decouple from value of companies to where things get oversold, people realize it eventually, and then you see that V-shaped recovery. Real estate is a much slower lagging process. It follows what's called a U-shaped recovery. And I was talking about this with the team, is that for a new home buyer who doesn't have school-age kids and has a little more flexibility, it might benefit you to wait to see how the dust settles, because we have so much data coming in right now, is because this is a lagging indicator in the fact that, think about this, houses went up 40+% during the pandemic period. Yep. So people right now are still rubbing their hands together going, man, I'm making so much money on my real estate. But yet we know interest rates have gone from sub 3 to now we're over 7%. That is going to put a cooling effect on real estate, where people are not going to be as willing to buy property, but it's going to take time for the sellers who are feeling all frothy and excited about the value to kind of realize, hey, there's just not that many buyers that are willing to finance this high of a price home at 7%. So you're going to see a kind of a trickle where all of a sudden somebody will have to sell their house because they're getting relocated or something. So they will sell the house for whatever they have to get out of the house because they have to relocate. That will happen once, twice, 3 times, and then people are like, oh my gosh. And then you'll start to see a panic. And that's actually how this drops. And then you won't see, it's always a slow process with real estate versus, like I said, stocks are V-shaped recoveries. So I think I'm going to sound a little bit like I'm talking out both sides of my mouth, because I told you, if you have an immediate need, meaning you have kids that are school age, you're going to be in the property for probably 7+ years, you sometimes have to hold your nose and just make the decision because you have an urgent need. However, in this real estate market where, if you don't have that urgent need, there is likely going to be a benefit to waiting to see where the data, because there's usually an opportunity. This is not like if you miss the opportunity this week, it's gone next week. Typically, real estate is a much slower moving process. You can kind of see how the numbers develop a little bit more.
So in terms of answering the question, should I buy in 2023, the first thing you're saying is you need to assess your need. Do you need a home? And then you need to assess the urgency of your need. Do I need a home right now, or before the next school year, before the job start, or whatever? Or do I have some time to see this out, to see if prices come down, to see if interest rates might subside? Another thing that might be a reason why you would consider buying real estate or buying a home in 2023 is that saving for a down payment right now is actually easier than it has been for the past couple of years. We've had people saying, I want to save for a house, I want to build up cash, but cash is doing nothing. Cash is doing nothing. Cash is doing nothing. Can I invest that? Can I do T-bills? Can I, fill in the blank with the thing they want to do? And it's been hard for people to build up that stable base, to build a down payment fund. That's gotten a little bit easier here recently.
Yeah, it is interesting. If we pull up the slide of what the Fed funds rate has done, I mean, this is a double-edged sword. It's a blessing and a curse in the fact that it is nice that your cash is now getting north of 4%, getting closer to 5%. I mean, which now feels like, hey, man, I'm actually making some money every month. It's encouraging when I see I have interest. But you also have to recognize when you look at this Fed funds rate chart that we have, where you see the affordability of housing is directly correlated, that interest rates now being over 7% on mortgages is in direct relationship to the Federal Reserve raising rates. So this is a gift, but it's also a curse. And that's something that I think that you have to work through. But it does give you, while you're in that, if you're in that phase where you have flexibility, at least while you're trying to build up the down payment on the house, you're actually going to make a little bit of money. Because I don't think the inflationary pressure, because we always hear, hey, inflation was 8% over the last year. Your cash is only making now 4.5%. So you're still losing purchasing power. Not necessarily with real estate, because if housing prices are settling down a little bit while there's this lag between people selling, not realizing there's not as many buyers, you might actually be able to build in the background, not be losing that purchasing power because it's the real estate's actually adjusting. That's a win.
Okay, so we can assess, all right, do we need a home? Or we're a place in life where needing a home makes sense and we have an understanding of our urgency. And interest rates, while they're cutting on the mortgage rate side, they're actually helping on the down payment side. So you're thinking, okay, I'm moving in this direction of buying a house. What else do I need to know? What are other things? Well, we wanted to prepare some questions for you to answer before buying, because we think to be an informed buyer, not just in this market, but in any market, you ought to really understand the answer to these questions. The first one, Brian, that we talked about, and we've said this over and over and over again, is how long is your time horizon? When it comes to buying real estate, when it comes to buying a home, it is not a short-term decision, because real estate markets don't move in the short term. When you buy a house, we really want you to be in there for 5, 7, 10 years, so that it's not as important what the price you paid was if you give it enough time to cover, okay, maybe I overpaid a little bit, maybe that's not as big of a deal because you have a long enough timeline.
Yeah, and by the way, if you're listening to this on the podcast side of things, or even watching it, you do not have to write down these questions. We're in a second, we're going to tell you about a free deliverable we've created so you can actually, you yourself, go download from our resource pages, free deliverable on all the questions you should ask yourself. So we'll share that in a second. But I wanted to just free everybody up so you could actually listen to the points, learn, seep it in so that you understand is that Bo is exactly right. Time is one of the biggest factors you've got to consider. Like I said, I understand if you're relocating to an area, sometimes you have no choice. I bullied Bo into buying his first house or second house because of they had a growing family, and I was like, man, get in there. I feel like I bullied Rebe into her first home to a degree. Because it lined up with the family need, but others you might need to wait. But overall, still 7 to 10 years. I mean, because we always say in our deliverables 5 to 7 years, but I will tell you, in this type of a market where there's uncertainty on the pricing, are you getting a good value for the house, or is it going to adjust down even further? The longer you can go out on how long you can commit to being in this property and setting roots, the easier it mitigates the variation of the market cycle. So pay attention. That's the reason it's question number one. How long is your time horizon on this?
Frankly, we think that's the most important question. When it comes to buying real estate, that's the most important question. Well, the second question, this is not surprising, and Brian, you talked a lot about this in show prep and as we've been developing this content. The question you have to answer is, what is we used your word, we didn't even change it. What's the sizzle of your location? What on earth does that mean, Brian? Why does the sizzle of the location matter?
I think it's so interesting that we just showed at the beginning of the show two very different perspectives. One was saying biggest collapse in real estate of our lifetime. And then we had another commentary who said, hey, best time because we have low supply. You're not going to see the drop in the housing prices. How you can be in completely different polar, but it's hard to put this blanket over the entire country because what do you hear about real estate? Location, location, location. There are going to be parts of the country where migration patterns, where industry moving into the area, it creates sizzle. There's a reason I use that word is because there's so many people moving to that area. It's crazy to think you're going to have the same reduction in value there that you might have in other areas where people are moving. Once again, a perfect experience share. I'm from South Atlanta. You're from South Atlanta. South Atlanta real estate values after the Great Recession got crushed. The area we now live in this Franklin, Tennessee, Nashville area, the downturn of 2008 through the 2010 to 11, because that was that U-shaped period, was about the houses lost like 10, 11%.
Very different than the south side
Meanwhile,
of Atlanta.
South Atlanta, I kid you not, 50 to 60% reduction in value. So it's you have to pay attention to the sizzle and what is going on in the area, because that's a big important thing. Don't get caught up in the emotion, because that's the biggest problem with real estate. And that's why when my wife wants to go look at stuff, I'm like, as soon as you start looking, the idea will grow that you need to make a decision. Keep it analytical, and so, but you've got to do the work on sizzle. When we were considering relocating to this area, and we had big needs on schools, because I needed a special school for my autistic daughter, but I also needed a good public school system for my oldest daughter. We wanted good opportunity from a socioeconomic situation to have a wealth management firm. We did the research to know just how much sizzle was in this area before we actually pulled the trigger on it.
And not all areas, not all locations have the same amount of sizzle. So if you are a buyer, there's some things you want to pay attention to. Pay attention to population trends. How many folks are moving into the area or out of the area? How many businesses are coming to the area? What do the available job opportunities look like? How much time are houses in that area spending on the market? That's a huge indicator into how frothy or not frothy the real estate prices may be. If you can educate yourself around that specific sizzle, it'll help you make decisions. So, Brian, what if the area you're looking at is super, super hot, and because of that, the prices are starting to get high? Should we start expanding our search out? Like, okay, I know I want to be in a suburb of Nashville, but maybe the Franklin area is really, really expensive. Should I think about extending that out? Is that a prudent decision if I know I'm someone looking for a housing solution this year?
Once again, it comes back to your why, because I love for you guys to learn from my mistakes, and the fact that I moved back to the South Atlanta after college and everything, because I knew it was comfortable for me. I had family down there. I knew the area. I thought when I started my first business down there that everybody who I went to high school, all their parents and everybody else would remember, oh, Brian, he was a smart guy. But it doesn't work that way. I was very short-sighted in thinking about what is this area, what's the opportunities here, what's going to happen around here. And I chose, plus in South Atlanta, you could get, I'll just say it was a McMansion for not much money.
Not at all.
So I was like, man, this is a no-brainer, because if I move here, I can get a 3,500, 3,700 square foot house with a basement and a nice community.
Very different.
If I look in North Atlanta, I'm going to be able to buy an 1,800 square foot or maybe 2,200 square foot home, smaller piece of property. But I'm telling you, be careful. Sometimes this is back to the location. I don't want you spending 45 minutes a day each way. So essentially an hour and a half commuting, because if you look at happiness indicators, commuting time is one of the biggest drivers of unhappiness. So don't, make a short time decision because you're thinking about, I can buy this big old house for this little bit of money, and not think about how much time, how much of your life you're going to give to sitting in that car. Now, as a content creator, I love you long commuters, because it's perfect for downloading our show and the podcast and listening. But from a happiness standpoint, that's more important to me than even the consumption of our content. Think about that. At least give it some consideration. Now, look, I know, like Avery was talking about one of her college professors, and she on purpose lives a good bit outside of Nashville because she has horses. Sure. She has like all this land.
Makes sense for the stuff she values.
There are people that, yes, it still might make sense to pull the trigger and actually do it, but measure twice, cut once, and make sure you're taking into account a full 360 of what your life's demands are versus just getting excited. I can get this big old house for this a lot cheaper than it is over here. There's a reason typically why there's a big deal there.
So what I'm hearing you say is when it comes to making real estate decisions, I don't need to let the dollars and cents be the only thing that goes into my consideration, but I also don't need to let the touchy-feely happy stuff only be. It's got to be a marriage of those two things to make sure that I'm appropriately analyzing the sizzle in my location. So that's question number 2. Question number 3 that we think is so important to ask is, what is your family situation? Now, this one is one right now. I am a family of 5, and it is very, very different than I was Bo Hansen single family of 1. And the housing needs associated with that are very, very different. And the things that I value are very, very different. So do you believe that for the next 5, 7, 10 years, your family situation, whether you're married, whether you have children, how many children you have, whether you're going to be an empty nester, all of those kinds of things need to come into consideration, because you don't want to buy a house for what makes sense today and find out that a short 12, 18, 24 months from now, holy cow, this house was way too small. Or holy cow, we built way too big of a house and now the kids are off at college and we don't even see each other. We don't even use half of the rooms. Make sure you understand you have a clear vision on what the family situation is going to look like for the next 5, 7, 10 years.
Well, we've spent a lot of time talking about families, but I'll tell you, it's not just families. I have a client, and I feel like I'm half marital counselor. And the fact that when we talk about what typically comes up at least once a year, and this has been a client for over a decade now, is he was single when he bought his house. Mm-hmm. He's now married. You know, it's a couple that this was, you know, they're a little bit older as they got married. She brings up that she hates the house. Oof. Every time. But he's pretty good with money, and he doesn't want to move just for the sake of moving so she can, you know. So it's just a weird. So I would tell you, family situation is not just kids. It could be, is your future spouse. I mean, if you're, you know, going to like this property, because there's all kind of things that go into your family situation. I actually struggled with was, should this be the second question or third question? Because it really, this is what's going to drive both the time horizon. This is what's going to drive your decision in a lot of ways, is what's your actual personal family situation, even and future family situation, so you don't mess this up.
The next question we would encourage you to think about before buying is, do you have really good job security? One of the things that makes us nervous in this amazing technological driven world that we're in is that people move a lot, right? Like, it's not uncommon for us to have clients who get a job in some other part of the country, and one of the very first things that they do is they get a job and they relocate and they immediately buy a house. And while that can work and that can be an okay thing, it can also be really, really risky. You want to make sure before you're signing on the dotted line, I'm going to pay for this piece of real estate for the next 15 years or for the next 30 years, I feel pretty confident that I'm going to be in the job that I'm in for long enough to pay for that, or that if I'm not going to be in this job, I will have the ability to be gainfully employed to be able to afford that mortgage. If you're in some like high-flying sales field or high-flying tech field and your compensation is all over the place and maybe the startup's going to make it or maybe the startup's not going to make it, buying real estate may not be the thing for you in this season unless you know that you can keep the payment inside the realm of affordability.
Well, I would kind of reverse engineer this the back way, and the fact that how stable is your job? Because that's something that I worry about with a lot of people. I mean, because I work with a lot of technology people, IT people, and we all know this is a rough year. If you work at any of these type of jobs, there's a lot of reduction in force going on. Yep. And here's a reality that I've seen. I live in a pretty nice neighborhood, and I see with some of my neighbors, to get to the levels of income some of these people have, if you lose your job, there's a chance that's such a senior position. It's not going to be a work from remote type situation. A lot of people are to get to replace the same level of income at that high, you know, once you're beyond six figures and even up into executive level, you're going to relocate. It's so you need to think about, how safe is my job? Because more than likely, if you lose your job, you buy into a high price of a living area for this new job, and then that job doesn't work out. It's not like you just go down the street and get another job at that price. It's a good chance you might have to move your whole family. And if you're getting squeezed into selling in a market that's just not as frothy and liquid as it's been in the last 2 to 3 years,
it's not ideal.
You're going to have a compounded negative impact. You're going to be looking for a job, plus having to make hard decisions, and desperate decisions are when we make bad mistakes, because you make them out of you have to do it versus it's a good decision for you and your personal finances. All
right. So the next question we think you should ask, that you should answer before buying real estate, is how big is your emergency fund? And you may be thinking, oh no, guys, you're confused. You got a mistake here. when you buy real estate, we're talking about down payment money. We're not talking about emergency funds. No, we really mean how big is your emergency fund? Because oftentimes we know that when we're renting and something goes wrong or something breaks or something has to go get fixed, it's as easy as shooting off a quick email or making a quick phone call. It's on the landlord. But when you buy the house and all of a sudden the thing in the inspection got missed, or you didn't realize that the AC was on its last leg, or the roof has an issue you didn't know that it has, those repairs are now on you. People often underestimate, especially first-time home buyers, the true cost of owning a home is not just what goes into the closing table. It's what goes in the closing table plus all the stuff you have to take care of after the fact. So you want to make sure you have enough liquidity built up to protect yourself from getting too lean too fast.
Well, also when you move into a brand new home, there's probably going to be a desire to put new furniture in there.
Yep.
It's all back to the Diderot effect. You know, when you get the new house, you're going to have new things that desire. I mean, heck, your first night you get there, you're probably going to go to Target and spend $450 on step ladders and cleaning supplies and others and toilet paper holders or whatever else that you have to put in. So pay attention. Just know emergency fund. Not only do you have to go beyond the down payment, you have to think about what is that first 6 months to a year of living in that new house going to cost me.
And then that is a perfect segue into the next question. Do you have an adequate down payment? Have you run the numbers to make sure that you're putting enough down on this home that the rest of the cost, if you're not paying in cash, is going to be affordable for you long term? Notice how many questions you had to answer about real estate before you actually got to the down payment question.
Yeah, it's definitely one of those things. And you know, we give a lot of flexibility on down payment. If this is your first home, we already know you have a lot of things working against you on the affordability with the interest rates as well as the rising costs. So we've always been consistent on this. We didn't have to wait for this post-pandemic period to give it to you, but 3 to 5% down on the first home is perfectly fine because we're just trying to get you into the game so that you can do this. Now, when you upgrade down the road, that's a 20% down payment. It's not something, so you better choose well on the first home, but we do try to give you some grace and flexibility so that you can actually make that decision without feeling like the market's running away from you because you can't come up with the right down payment.
Then the next question we want you to answer after do I have an adequate down payment is, do I have stable cash flow? Now, we already talked about job security. Do I feel reasonably assured that I'm going to have a job or be gainfully employed for the foreseeable future? Now it's stable cash flow. What other debt service do I have? Do I have a lot of student loans that I'm servicing? Do I have auto loan debt? Do I have credit card debt? Do I have enough left over at the end of the month, or do I have enough put aside at the beginning of the month that I know I'm going to keep my house inside of the affordability realm when it comes to satisfying that mortgage payment? Without stable cash flow coming in, it can be pretty crazy, pretty scary to now have a mortgage payment that's on the books that you don't have a choice. You got to pay it every month or else you go into a bad spot.
Well, it also lets you plan ahead on the cash flow because we still want to create inevitable automatic wealth, which means you have an automatic saving and investment plan that's going into place. If you only invest what's left over, that's going to be a policy of failure. But also, having a stable cash flow also goes into the fact, because when you and Daniel were talking about this earlier, is that a lot of times, especially if you're a younger person, your income is in the next 3 to 4 years could look completely different where it does now. So I would encourage you. We always talk about the 25% of your income is kind of your threshold or boundaries on that. I do think in these unique times where housing is expensive, you can look ahead as long as you're not getting overconfident and essentially working against yourself by, if you're making $55,000 a year, don't say in 3 years I'll be making $175,000. That's probably a little aggressive because you're trying to back into what you can afford. But I think it is completely reasonable to say, hey, if I'm making 55, I see big things going on at the company. I think I could be making 65, 70,000 plus this. You can plan ahead so that you're actually going where the ball is going without putting yourself too far ahead of your skis. How many analogies can I get into one statement? But but seriously, I think you'll see what I'm talking about is take into account the cash flow, the savings and investment plan, and where your career is going so you can get that perfect sweet spot on buying the right house for your family.
And then the last question we want you to answer before buying a house is, what's your credit score? If you're someone out there, especially with interest rates as high as they are right now, you want to have the best credit score possible so that you can get the best rate possible. Well, do you know what your credit score is. Do you know the 5 things that go into it? If you don't, go check us out on Instagram, go check us out on TikTok. We just recently did a reel showing you what are the 5 things you need to work on. This can have a huge impact, can it, Brian?
Yeah, it definitely, you can get squeezed on this. I've made a lot of mistakes with my credit score. My first home, I'll just go ahead and I'll lay these out really quick. I opened a store credit card, disaster right before we were pulling
because
the credit score.
Because you were going to furnish it. It was logical,
well,
right?
They offered me 10 to 15% discount. You offered me a deal on it. Back then, younger Brian, broke Brian was like, yeah, because I already felt like I was overpaying. Second thing I screwed up is I didn't understand how credit utilization and how the credit rating agencies looked at it. So I thought, you know what would make them look really good at me is if I had less access to debt.
I don't even need the debt credit card companies.
So I actually lowered some of my credit limits. I called and requested that they lower the credit limit, not understanding how credit scores worked. So it's don't make those mistakes. I've had to remind some of my coworkers, as they're buying their first homes, I was like, because they're trying to go to the new credit cards and they want to close other credit cards that aren't being used. I'm like, if it's your oldest credit cards, do not close them, even if it is for an amusement park that you don't even go to anymore, like I did with the Six Flags credit card. Was my first one. I'm truly am a cartoon character, but it is. But fortunately, I was able to change it into something else. But don't mess up those credit mistakes as you're getting into your home buying season.
So we think that these are 8 great questions that you can answer before buying a home, and if you can answer these questions well, you'll know, okay, yes, I should buy a home, whether the crash is coming or whether house prices are going to go up, and it's more dependent upon these factors. We thought these were so good, we wanted to create a free resource for you. So if you've not been to our resource page, go to moneyguide.com/resources, and you can download this home buying checklist. Maybe you have someone in your life, a child, a grandchild, a friend, a colleague thinking about buying a home. Go download this, send them a copy of it, tell them about the show, have them listen to this so that even in this unique and difficult and trying home buying market, they can still make a wise, educated decision when it comes to their personal finances.
Yeah, and I love this because that's what we're always trying to help you make better decisions. That's why if you haven't subscribed, I would encourage you, please subscribe. We forget to ask you that sometimes because we're so excited to share the content, educate you, and plant the seeds of the abundance cycle. But this is one of those things I'd encourage you, subscribe, but then also go sign up and download some of our free resources. This is just one of many, many, many free things that we're giving away out there. I did want to pivot, Bo, because we're kind of closing, landing this airplane, and the fact that, let's talk about when it is definitely not a time to buy. And this is something we can go through pretty quickly because I've already talked about some of this, like unstable employment. If you think you might have a reduction in force coming your way, don't go buy a house at this point. If your family situation's unclear, that's not a good time to look at it too. No down payment because we've already given you the grace of 3 to 5%. If you can't come up with 0%, don't force it because there might be some crazy lender that comes up with some interest only or no down payment. I don't think those exist anymore, but still be careful with that. And then last, if you don't have enough money to get you through an emergency, like about having lack of emergency fund, you definitely don't have enough money to be thinking about buying a house.
So again, if you answer any of these questions in the positive, your spidey sense ought to go off. Your red flag ought to start waving. But if you do pass this and then you do answer the 8 questions well, we want to give you sort of the money guy take. How do we look at buying a home? What are the things that you should think about? We've distilled it down to 3 really easy ones. Will I be in this house for 5 to 7 years? Am I making a long-term decision? Do I have an appropriate down payment? And if I'm a first-time home buyer, it's okay if it's not 20%. It's okay if I put down 3 to 5% on my first home, so long as I make sure on any subsequent homes I am putting down the full 20% when I want to upgrade. And are the total monthly costs, is my total monthly debt service on my house less than 25% of my gross income? If I can answer those 3 questions well, I can follow those 3 standards well, then I'm likely going to set myself up to be a happy and satisfied home buyer that did not let myself get out ahead of my skis.
Yeah, I think that's good. And I kind of just want to have a few closing, comments on this whole real estate thing. Is I go back to Harry Dent, who thinks that we're having, impeding. We actually have a collapse any day now headed our way. And then we had Run DMC Dave Ramsey in his tracksuit. I love Dave, but it just cracks me up seeing him in that tracksuit. But Dave thinks that markets aren't going to go down at all because of the whole supply and demand, and we have a lack of housing out in the country. I think they actually both could be right. And I think that it goes back to they oversimplified a very complex issue. It's all about the location. Because Dave, in the area we live here in this Nashville area where so many businesses and industries are moving in and there is a lack of supply, especially in starter homes and so forth, Dave's not wrong. He's not going to lose, but I don't think Harry's wrong either in the fact that there will be communities where the housing market will kind of get crushed. Yep. So that's why we gave you the checklist. Take advantage of that. Please do your research, because it's like everything else you'll find in your financial life. The more preparation, the more you ask yourself important questions about the why and how does this fit within my financial life and where I want to take my life, begin with the end in mind. I think you'll quickly see that this answers itself, and you will have a peace that no matter what's going on in the real estate marketplace, you've done the homework, you've done the research, you've measured twice, and now it's okay if the market takes a little bit of a breather. It's okay if you don't have a lot of extra value, but also you won't get left behind in hot markets like Nashville if you look at this. So take a deep breath. If you have flexibility and you don't have an immediate demand, maybe it makes sense to wait 6 to 9 months, because with U-shaped recovery, you do have time. But also, if you're a person that has the time that you can live, wait the 7 to 10 years, because I do feel like 10, 15 years in the future, you're still, it goes back to what you talked about earlier, bro. I felt ripped off on every house I've bought. You're going to feel the same way. I don't think you ever feel perfect about a home purchase, but the more time you can give it, the more you can give yourself assurance that you're going to be okay on the other side.
Guys, if you want to know more about all the housing stuff that we do, all the financial information we give, make sure that you subscribe. It's the way that you can stay connected to us. It's the way you can stay plugged in with us. Go check out the website, moneyguy.com/resources for all of our free deliverables. Go check out learn.moneyguy.com if you want to have a deeper dive. Thank you so much for letting us be a part of your financial journey.
I'm your host, Brian, Mr. Bo Hansen, Reby, and the rest of the content group. Money Guy team, out.